It crossed the rigid lines that separated all the different churches and social classes in England. This led the club to accommodate men, women, and children regardless of race, religion, or nationality. In the mid-1800s, the first of these organizations was founded by a man named George Williams. Little did he know that 134 years later, his creation would be made globally famous by a rather flamboyant group of men containing a cop, a construction worker, an Indian, and a cowboy. In 1978, the Village People released their hit single, YMCA, propelling the organization's name to astronomical fame. But to get to the origins of the YMCA, we can't start with a song, but with the grimy streets of London, England in 1844. In the mid-1800s, industrialized London was a pretty bleak place to live. There was great poverty and despair. Many young men migrated to the city from rural areas, searching for jobs, only to find gangs, tenement housing, and dangerous influences. The growth of the railroad and the centralization of commerce was the reason so many people came to the city. Young men were forced to work 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. 22-year-old George Williams, who came to the city as a farmer to become a department store worker, saw the poverty and despair of London, and it changed his life. As a Christian, he felt the need to do something about it.
In 1844, Williams and 11 of his friends banded together to organize the first Young Men's Christian Association as a refuge for young men trying to escape life on the London streets. Williams wanted to create a space for young men to put Christian principles into practice by developing a healthy mind, body, and spirit, represented by the three angles on the iconic YMCA triangle. The men participated in Bible studies and prayer during their meetings. The one thing that made the YMCA stand out from other men's meetings occurring during that time was their drive to meet the social needs in the community and being open to any social class.
Williams was born in 1821 to a farmer and his wife. He described his younger self as a careless, thoughtless, godless, swearing young fellow. Hard to believe when you look at all he accomplished in his own lifetime, let alone how what he created catapulted into so much more than he could have ever imagined.
"15-year-old George first moved to London to be an apprentice to a draper, and by age 20 was working as one himself. His living situation was not ideal, just some accommodations provided by the firm in the same building. This was how most young men lived during this time, living at their workplace, oftentimes in overcrowded rooms above the company's shop. But that was a whole lot safer than being in the tenements and on the streets. George became one of the 150,000 young men just like him that crowded the streets of London. Outside, there were open sewers, pickpockets, thugs, beggars, drunks, prostitutes, and abandoned children running wild by the thousands. George wanted to combat what he saw happening on the streets with Bible study and prayer. The first YMCA meeting was held in his own drapery shop in St. Paul's churchyard. Their objective was the improvement of the spiritual condition of the young men engaged in houses of business by the formation of Bible classes, family and social prayer meetings, mutual improvement societies, or any other spiritual agency.
Even though the YMCA was started by evangelicals, it crossed the rigid lines that separated all the different churches and social classes in England. This led the club to accommodate men, women, and children regardless of race, religion, or nationality. As his meetings became more and more successful, Williams wasted no time in organizing YMCA branches all throughout the United Kingdom. By 1851, there were 24 YMCAs in Great Britain.
George Williams and his band of friends could never have imagined that the YMCA would spread beyond the island on which they lived. A few years later, a retired Boston sea captain named Thomas Sullivan was inspired by what he'd heard about the Y in England and led the formation of the first U.S. YMCA on December 29, 1851. Sullivan was working as a marine missionary and noticed the need for a home away from home for sailors and merchants. Then, in 1853, the first YMCA for African Americans was founded in Washington, D.C. by Anthony Bowen, who himself was a freed slave. 3 YMCA leaders, commissioned to develop the movement in western United States, purchased land near Lake Geneva and began a permanent professional YMCA training school called George Williams College. Workers from all across the country would gather there for physical activity, spiritual reflection, and service learning. The school grew quickly, and in 1890 they moved it to a neighborhood of Chicago. It became an institution of higher learning for students entering human service professions like parks and recreation, education, and social work. The original Lake Geneva campus became a college camp and used for retreats. During the Civil War, the Ys formed the U.S. Christian Commission to assist the troops and prisoners of war. They gave more than 1 million Bibles to men fighting, the beginning of a commitment to working with soldiers and sailors. After the war, they had to rebuild. Their focus was on saving souls through saloon and street corner preaching, also providing lists of Christian houses, lectures, libraries, and meeting halls.
It wasn't until the 1880s that the YMCA started putting up buildings of their own. These buildings included a variety of gyms, swimming pools, auditoriums, bowling alleys, and dormitories. Inside, the volunteers organized programs to help transform mind, body, and spirit. And in the 1890s, led to the creation of basketball and volleyball. It's true. These sports played across the world today were invented by volunteers of the YMCA.
More branches of the YMCA started popping up all over the world, including areas of Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and India. The YMCA soon became a global movement with the help of Henry Dunant, who started the first YMCA World Conference, bringing together 99 delegates from 9 countries. Permanent headquarters were established in Geneva, Switzerland, and it eventually became known as the World YMCA. Because of George Williams' accomplishments, he was knighted by Queen Victoria in 1894, and after his death, he was commemorated in stained glass in the nave of Westminster Abbey. The inscription reads, "To the glory of God and in memory of the services rendered through the Young Men's Christian Association during the Great War, 1914 to 1918. And to George Williams, its founder. George Williams was buried in St. Paul's Cathedral in 1905. John Mott, a leader of the YMCA movement in America, was given a Nobel Peace Prize for the YMCA's role in increasing global understanding and for its humanitarian efforts. Mott was a major influence on the Y's missionary movement. The American YMCAs sent out thousands of workers overseas, both as missionaries and war workers. The YMCA's mission survived wars and barriers, and it still exists today.
The Campfire Girls, the Boy Scouts, the Associated Press, and the Peace Corps were organizations inspired and patterned after the YMCA. Today, there are 2,700 branches of the YMCA in the United States, and the Y can be found in nearly 120 countries worldwide.